Dark piano rumble. Faint wind. A heartbeat. Then silence. They never left the house. 15 of them, born behind warped wooden walls where sunlight barely touched the floor. No school records. No birth certificates. No history anyone wanted to claim. Some never spoke. Others only grunted. One girl was said to walk backwards for months before anyone noticed. And that's where the story begins. Not in some distant medieval land. Not in a lost tribe or forgotten kingdom. But in the Appalachian Mountains of the United States. Your country. Your backyard. And what you're about to hear isn't just a family tragedy. It's a generational curse hidden behind American silence, and it was never supposed to reach you. Gracie Whittaker wasn't born to break the cycle. She was born from it. The daughter of first cousins, and granddaughter of twin brothers. Her family tree didn't branch. It curled in on itself, folded like a loop. When she came into the world, she was already more related to herself than most people are to their siblings. And the town, Odd, West Virginia, didn't ask questions. They just called it Mountain Ways. But what happens when the line gets too tight? When DNA recycles, and reality distorts? You get children who don't speak, can't read, don't blink at the right times. You get faces twisted by unseen math. Muscles that don't coordinate. Minds that wander without ever returning. And no one stopped it. Gracie married her double cousin, genetically, almost a brother. Together, they had 15 children in a shack barely holding up against the trees. Locals whispered. But no doctors came. No police stepped in. Because to the outside world, these people didn't exist. But they did. And some still do. This is not just about inbreeding. It's about a deeper question. What happens when society ignores its own shadows for so long they become a second species? You see, power doesn't always look like gold rings and polished suits. Sometimes it looks like the ability to vanish entire families. Off the grid, with no consequences. And when you understand why no one intervened, you begin to glimpse the real machinery that shapes human life. You are not watching this by accident. Stay with me. What comes next will change the way you see bloodlines, silence, and the secret costs of forgotten power. There's a reason stories like these aren't taught in classrooms. It's not because they're rare. It's because they expose something most institutions can't explain. A flaw in the system so deep, so generational, that acknowledging it would unravel the myth of progress itself. Laureen was born into that flaw. She wasn't just Gracie's daughter. She was the living embodiment of DNA pushed too far. She never spoke a word in her life. Not because she didn't want to, but because her body never learned how. Her muscles never fully formed. Her eyes moved differently. Her thoughts, if she had them, were locked behind glass no one could break. Imagine being born into a family where language itself has eroded. Where names are passed down like whispers, but no one remembers who had them first. Imagine your entire life spent on a single patch of dirt, surrounded by the same dozen faces, most of them unable to care for themselves, none of them allowed to leave. That's not a home. That's a genetic echo chamber. And it wasn't just Laureen. Every generation of the Whittakers bore the same mark. An increasing collapse of cognitive, emotional, and physical capability. This wasn't just bad luck. It was engineered by isolation. Reinforced by poverty. Protected by silence. You might be asking, why didn't anyone stop this? Where were the doctors, the agencies, the neighbors? But here's the truth. In certain parts of the country, families like this don't fall through the cracks. They are the cracks. They're too poor to prosecute. Too isolated to investigate. Too generational to correct. And the ones in charge, the real power, they don't intervene because they need these places to exist. As cautionary tales. As statistical padding. As examples of what happens when you fall behind. It's the same reason some schools never get funding, some towns never get cleaned up, and some people are born just to be forgotten. That's not neglect. That's design. And the deeper you go into stories like Laureen's, the more you realize this isn't just a family problem. It's a structural algorithm, generations of suffering coded into the American blueprint. Right now, I want you to comment below with the phrase, "Blood remembers. Eyes forget." Blood remembers. Eyes forget. Comment it twice. Lock it in. That phrase isn't just symbolic. It's transformation, the moment you stop being a viewer, and start becoming something more dangerous, aware. Keep watching. What comes next will make everything you've heard so far feel like a whisper. They say history is written by the victors. But what if I told you, some history is never written at all? There are stories so disfigured, so grotesque, that no textbook will ever print them. Stories not of war or empire, but of bloodlines folding in on themselves. Generations caged by secrecy, ritual, and desperation. And what happened inside that collapsing wooden shack in Odd, West Virginia, is one of them. Gracie Whittaker's family wasn't just inbred. They were sealed. Sealed off from education. Sealed off from modern medicine. Sealed off from any influence that might break the cycle. The walls of that house weren't just wood, they were genetic prison bars. Some of her children never walked. Others couldn't blink properly. A few only ever made guttural sounds. Not words, just noises. Human in shape, but robbed of what makes us fully human. Connection, cognition, expression. But here's the part no one wants to admit. This didn't happen by accident. These families weren't just unlucky. They were engineered into silence. You see, the American frontier myth romanticized isolation, rugged individualism, self-reliance. But in places like rural Appalachia, that myth became a trap, a cultural justification for cutting entire populations off from advancement, from help, from oversight. Because when people disappear into the hills, no one asks questions. And when those people start to unravel, generation by generation, there's no one left to speak for them. Until now. Let's go deeper. There's evidence that some of these inbred bloodlines, not just in the Whittaker family, but others like them across the South, were deliberately overlooked by local governments. Officials knew. Teachers knew. Clergy knew. But reporting it would mean acknowledging that American progress has blind spots, and those blind spots have bodies in them. How many Gracies and Loreens have there been? How many children were born without names? How many lived and died within 5 miles of their birth, never knowing the world outside existed? This is more than a story. It's a genetic haunting. And the system didn't just allow it, it required it. These families became the bottom of the barrel, a human caution sign, silently screaming, "Don't end up like this." But here's the truth they don't want you to hear. The same systems that left them behind are still running today. Different masks. Same engine. And you're inside it, whether you see it yet or not. Keep going. You're not falling. You're waking up. They always say, the truth will set you free. But what they don't tell you is that truth comes with a cost. Gracie's family paid that cost in full. Not with money. Not with crimes. But with bodies. With minds. With silence. You have to understand something. The story of America's most inbred family isn't just about genetics, it's about deliberate containment. These people weren't just forgotten. They were erased by design. And the deeper you dig, the darker it gets. There are whispers, records hidden in local courthouses, sealed testimonies from nurses, social workers, teachers, all pointing to the same terrifying possibility. That in some rural towns, bloodline isolation wasn't just tolerated. It was encouraged. Because isolation breeds obedience. When a population can't think clearly, can't organize, can't question the world beyond their doorstep, they're easy to control. And when those people develop deformities, speech delays, mental fog, society looks at them and says, not our problem. But it was never their fault. They were born into cages made from shame, myth, and abandonment, and the system left the key just out of reach. Now let me ask you something directly, and I want you to answer it in the comments to lock in the dissent. Locked with key comment this phrase twice. I see the bloodline trap. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once enough of us say it out loud, the algorithm, and the mind, shifts. Here's what most men will never understand. This isn't about freak families in the hills. It's about what happens when a society weaponizes isolation. What happens when shame becomes policy. What happens when entire branches of humanity are trimmed off like dead limbs. But they're still alive, still breathing, still screaming in the dark. And here's the final layer of truth. In every generation, there are hidden experiments. Some social, some genetic. Some documented, others lost in burned records and buried towns. The Whittakers? The Loreens? The Ritas? They weren't mistakes. They were outcomes. Proof that when you leave people in the dark long enough, they stop asking questions and start becoming the silence. But you're not here to stay silent. You're here to remember. Let's go deeper. Because what's coming next will change how you see your own blood forever. You think the story ends in the woods? No. That's just where it begins. You see, the Whitakers weren't alone. From West Virginia to the Ozarks, from dusty Texas backroads to the edges of forgotten plains, there are hundreds of families, bloodlines cut off from the world, twisted inward by generations of control, shame, and neglect. But here's the part they never tell you. Some of these families weren't isolated by poverty or accident. They were isolated by design. In the early 20th century, a movement swept across the United States, quiet, cold, and cloaked in scientific language. It was called eugenics. Backed by universities, endorsed by governments, funded by elite families. The goal: purify the population. They drew charts, created categories, decided which bloodlines were fit, and which ones needed to vanish. And if a family like the Whitakers, already genetically damaged, already poor, already silent, disappeared from history, good. That was the plan. They called it sterilization. They called it institutionalization. But let's speak plainly, it was genetic erasure. Gracie's children, forgotten. Laureen, buried in silence. Rita, a ward of the state, her life logged in files most people will never read. It wasn't just oversight. It was systemic neglect, weaponized through policy. Because when you convince a nation that some people are too broken to save, you don't have to lift a finger to destroy them. You just let them rot. But here's the twist, and listen closely. Some of those erased bloodlines didn't vanish. They adapted. They stayed hidden. They learned how to mask the signs, how to blend in just enough to survive. And some of them, they walk among us. Today, you've seen them. You just didn't know what you were looking at. And they carry more than just physical traits. They carry a psychic wound, a generational silence that doesn't speak. It haunts. The system told them they were unworthy, unfixable, less than human. And yet, here they are. Still breathing. Still watching. Still carrying truths most men could never endure. Because the real horror isn't just in what happened to them. The real horror is that it could happen again. And this time, it won't be in the backwoods. It'll be on your block. In your school. In your family tree. The question is, will you see it coming? Or will you wait until it's your bloodline that starts to vanish? Get ready for the final descent. Because we go beyond blood. We go into the system that feeds on silence. You've made it this far. That means something inside you is shifting. That means you're no longer looking at the world the same way. And you're not supposed to. Because now, we're entering the part they fear you'll understand. This was never just about one family. Not the Whitakers. Not Rita. This is about the machine that manufactures silence. A system that doesn't just tolerate darkness, it needs it. Why? Because silence is currency. And shame is control. For over a century, institutions, governments, churches, schools, medical boards, have known about these families. And they made a choice. Cover it up. Redirect the narrative. Call them unfortunate. Call them backwards. Blame them for the damage that was done to them. Why? Because to acknowledge the truth is to admit complicity. To admit that entire bloodlines were broken, not just by bad genetics, but by a culture that abandoned them on purpose. That's the real legacy of eugenics. Not just sterilization. Erasure of the inconvenient. But the system doesn't stop there. Today, it's more sophisticated. It doesn't need force. It uses algorithms. It uses diagnoses. It uses social labels to decide who gets help and who gets hidden. It weaponizes words like developmental delay or spectrum disorder, turning complex human suffering into spreadsheet data. It turns pain into a case number and history into a rumor. But listen, you don't unsee what's been revealed here. You've gone beneath the surface. You've looked directly at what most men spend their lives avoiding. That means you're different now. If you feel that, if something in you has clicked open, then lock it in. Comment below, blood remembers blood. Do it twice, not once. That's your signal, to yourself and to the algorithm, that you're not just watching anymore. You're waking. Because when you trace the thread far enough, you'll see. It's not just the families that were bred into silence. It's all of us. Different chains. Same cage. And once you see the cage, The only choice left is to break it. This has been forbidden knowledge. The kind that doesn't just inform, it marks you. Now carry it like a weapon. Because the next time they tell you history is clean, you'll know what hides in the blood.